Hey everyone, welcome to my video essay about psychology and the impacts of racism for Black Americans, and with a center focus on the book The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, right here. So I wanted to talk about the interview that I'm going to cite in the bibliography. So some of the things that women in particular face is kind of having to succumb to the male ego and I'm not going to talk about this actually from the perspective of the woman. I'm just going to say that um, women's freedom and women existing in community in spaces like churches or like in covenant, like in like together, wherever these spaces are or whatever they are, and um, men that men thinking their successes is solely from themselves and only themselves, and they find women occupying these spaces, whatever they are, very threatening to that illusion of self-sufficiency that they have. And because of their social status and their strength, they can kind of go crazy and do whatever they want, which is very dangerous, and it's something that they talked about in the interview as well. And um, another reason that they find women in these spaces having freedom is so dangerous is because they're outside of the male control and the male gaze, and they can basically do anything they want, which they find threatening and dangerous. Obviously, not everyone, but just in general, on a general note. What else? The idea that violence is the solution. It's such like an alien kind of strange concept. And when we look at a lot of like the wars or conflicts and we look at them in retrospect and see were they worth the damage and the casualties, for the most part our answer is no. Like, what are those reasons that we go to war and we resort to violence? And like, how it's such a weird concept, like how do we end up with violence as the final solution? And as well, kind of the defiant act of not writing the race of the characters, because when we do, we often input, like as the readers and as the general public, that can be very stereotypical and very simplistic. We kind of insert our own stereotypes from our own life experience and the people around us. We insert that into the book, and just not writing the race forces the readers and the audience to engage with what's actually in the text instead of bringing on the baggage, as Toni Morrison calls it in the interview, um, bringing our own baggage and stereotypes of whatever race they said. So it's very much like a defiant act that she practices. Something that I wanted to talk about also is kind of the thought of being homeless, how like scarcity affects children as they age, even if they've not experienced it, like just like being in contact with that idea can really scar someone and cause them to be very materialistic and very attached to property and just owning and accumulating for its own sake. And that can be a really dangerous idea, and I think that the book, especially like at the start, they go on a tangent about this, and it's very interesting. And also the talk of the permanence of that, of being. So let me just read that excerpt. Put outdoors. So for context, this was, I think, when Pecola just arrived to Claudia and her family's house. So, and I think basically Pecola and her whole family were being put outside. I think, was it from their father? But that old dog. Breedlove had burned up his house, gone upside his wife's head, and everybody as a result was outdoors. So yeah, they kicked them out. Outdoors, we knew, was the real terror of life. The threat of being outdoors served us frequently in those days. Every possibility of excess was curtailed with it. If somebody ate too much, he could end up outdoors. So, like, they basically, this is describing how um, concept of being outdoors is very real to them, and it's very prevalent, like, in everything they do. They're very cautious of it. Anyways, um, and kind of this concept of being put outdoors is um, one of those things that's kind of interlinked with race somehow. Knowing that, here's the part that I like, anyways. Knowing that there was such a thing as outdoors bred in us hunger for property, for ownership, the firm possession of a yard, a porch, a grape arbor, property black people spent all their energies, all their love on their nests. Like frenzied, desperate birds, they overdecorated everything. So it's not only ownership, but also like taking pride in that and decorating and like personalizing it. It's basically like ownership times two. Where am I? Like frenzied, desperate birds, they overdecorated everything, and fidgeted over their hard-won homes, canned, jellied, and preserved all summer to fill the cupboards and shelves. So it's in such small ways, even like filling up the cupboard and shelves, it's like a sign of possession almost. Um, they painted, picked, and poked at every corner of their houses. All these houses loomed like hothouse sunflowers among the rows of weeds that were the rented houses. Renting blacks cast furtive glances at these owned yards and porches and made firmer commitments to buy themselves some nice little old place. Even like saying some nice little old place is it's such like um a statement to say that, because like the renting black people, as they say, like they're walking past people that own houses, and they're like, well, in some little nice place like that, and it's kind of like um I don't know, undermining property even though they care about it so much, to make themselves feel better like about their position as renters. Anyways, so yeah, they talk about the concept of Chali, which is, if you haven't read it, I'm sorry if, hopefully this is gonna make sense to you, but Choli put out his entire family, and so that's because of the significance of being what's the thing? Taken outside? Put his family outdoors. Being put outdoors because of the significance that I just illustrated, it's like a big deal, you know, like it's not just, oh, like he left them, like it is a huge concept in the community, a huge significance. Anyways, I wanted to talk about like concept of internalized oppression. It's not directly in this like as an oppression. It's not like, I feel like when I hear oppression I think of war, but it is very similar concept of some people reacting differently from others to racism. And I think the goal of Morrison with this book was to show the impacts of racism on the most vulnerable 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 population, which is represented by Pecola, who is a dark black girl, and um, I think it does it very well, just like showing the difference between characters. Some characters are more resilient in the face of racism and don't care about other people's opinions. For example, Claudia, who takes the racism set by society and she just throws it right back at them. And she really doesn't care, even if the subject of her abuse or like of her lashing out as a result of, you know, extrapolating racism don't deserve it. Like the dolls, like they're inanimate and they receive so much hate by her in the first few pages of the book. She doesn't care. But when we see someone like Pecola, and especially during like one of the scenes that she's walking to the grocery store, and she just internalizes so much and she's in her own head the entirety of the trajectory, um, you can really see how it affects her. And it's not only just society, but even her own mother. And there's various outlets and sources of this oppressive message of the beauty standard, the white beauty standard that is whispering in her ear. And you can really see how she crumbles. You can even see that Pecola, her concept of ugliness is entirely driven from what other people think. She doesn't really have much of her own thoughts. She just kind of like breathes in what other people think, even when it contradicts what she initially thinks. For example, she's like walking and she notices some weeds and she's like, I think at first she says she thought they were pretty, and then she changes her mind in the next page and she's like, they're ugly, they're weeds, and she's basically trying to convince herself, which is so sad. Um, because and also the fact that she's trying to convince herself also says something about society, how it's so like whatever society says is so different from reality that you need to convince and convince on top of that convincing and reaffirm whatever crazy trend it is and whatever crazy, you know, thing that's pretty or ugly or they want you to direct your hate towards. Um, but yeah, she just during that entire trip, I think it's like page like 50-ish, like 40 something to 50, and she's just very like she draws inwardly and you can really see the difference of Pecola and Claudia and like some of the other characters. And then the book also explains like the impact of family and the special impact that they have in curating like someone's perspective, especially towards racism and their own self-worth. But not it's not just about racism. There's also colorism, which is a huge thing. Um, so I'm definitely not saying Pecola is weaker than anyone. So not what I'm saying. But she is a larger victim of colorism than other people that are still black, but they're lighter than her. And it's very weird, like even within the black community, or not even the black community in this book, like racialized communities, there's this idea of colorism. And Pecola, because she's like really like dark skinned, like she's yeah, that's how she's described, struggles so much harder than other people in her school, and like even her mother. um it's really awful. Like, her mother was so obsessed with beauty and stuff like that and her own beauty, and she gets like these like romantic ideas from the media and movies and stuff like that, which are huge like oppressive force on women, and a huge like they're just racking up money and they're in filling up their pockets um at our expense and to exploit um vulnerable people and women. But yeah, so her mother is a victim of this industry and she projects on Pecola and can see all of the impacts, and it's really awful. But yeah, just wanted to mention it's not just racism, it's also colorism, and different shades are given different values of like how much those people are worth in others' perception and others' eyes, and it's very awful to read about, but it's very important because it is definitely like something that plagues a lot of communities. There's also class and how much money you have that is interlinked with race, like intersectionality. There's one part, I think it's like page like 70s, like that, like it's a whole scene. Um, but basically there's this really rich girl at Pecola in Claudia's school, and like Claudia's siblings. I think she only has like one sister, right? But anyways, like the main people I'm focusing here on is the main girl is Claudia. Because that girl, she rubs it in her face, you know, like she rubs her richness in people's faces a little bit, but um Pecola is like bullied by some boys, and the girl takes pity on her. Like her name is really not relevant, but anyways, she takes pity on her and buys her ice cream. And Claudia and her sister, I mean, I don't know if it was her sister, but Claudia especially assumes that the girl's gonna buy ice cream for everyone, and when she doesn't, it's like such like you can feel it. It's such like a blow to the heart because it's such an embarrassing moment. I'm not saying it's embarrassing, but Claudia thinks it's embarrassing for her. And it just shows kind of the impact of class and like not even being able to afford like a sweet treat, and how that really kind of um impacts. Yeah, but I feel like if this would have, it also shows character. Like if this would have happened to Pecola, it would have been a drastically different result. Um, but Claudia still feels shame, but her shame is more in anger versus Pecola, especially during her walk to the store that I talked about earlier. Like that scene, her shame was just shame, and she really didn't know what to do with it. And I think she even mentions that anger is better. There's a sense of being in anger, a reality and presence, and awareness of worth. It is a lovely surging. Oh, finally I found it. Okay, so basically, page 69. Frida looked placidly. Frida is Claudia's sister, right? I think so, yeah. Maureen is the girl. Doesn't matter, really. I opened my mouth but quickly closed it. It was extremely important that the world not know that I fully expected Maureen to buy us some ice cream, that for the past 120 seconds I'd been selecting the flavor, that I had begun to like Maureen, and that neither of us had a penny. So it's kind of that blow to the gut, and that kind of like shame and like, I don't know, like that diminishing like self-worth almost. Realizing like you're almost not worth ice cream, like in that moment, and it's such a silly thing, but it really shows this idea of class and how that impacts people. There's also um women kind of being in competition almost with other women, because some people are just naturally like they complain more, and they're just, it's not that they're more in tune with their pain, but they just are more loud about it, and they kind of give their problems to others more than they solve them themselves. um they're less independent essentially. Some people are willing to air their garbage out like to others and let them deal with it and give them that burden rather than being responsible with it. Maybe they've just been taught that. And so um some women deal with it themselves, and it's harder for them, really, like they're still struggling essentially, but they just are more reserved in their struggle, and that doesn't negate from their struggle. And this the part that really illustrates that is when she's giving birth. Pauline Breadlove, which is Picola's mom, and she's basically saying that I hurt just like them white women. And oh, basically, everything I said, give it like the idea of race, because you know, really makes sense. Like as I said, like the women that are more loud with their business and with their problems, they're willing to hand them over to other people to deal with, and less take them internally and struggle with them and be emotionally exhausted with their problems. um they've been taught that. Everything's been taught, just like the ideas of racism, you know, uh like previous things always inform things in the future, just like historical racism like still has its place in institutions, and it still, we can still feel its effects. Same thing goes with white women who have like had like a more easy history, and so they're more likely to be um the former woman rather than the latter. And you know, black women, even like in their households, they've been, at least in this, well, I'm like describing this book, I'm not trying to generalize or stereotype, but for a lot of the case, they've been kind of, even as kids, like kids in the family are seen as one unit and rather than individuals. And you know, they're not really given careful attention, and they're really taught from a young age, um these black girls, that they need to deal with things on their own, especially as like the eldest child. Um, so yeah, quote is, I hurt just like them white women. Wait, let me go to that actually. 125, page 125. Um, Here we go. So, a little doctor come to examine me. Okay. Basically, I don't need to read this part, but there's like a doctor, like she's giving birth. Basically, Pauline is giving birth. I think she's giving birth with her son. Yeah, well, anyways, doesn't matter. But the doctor comes to her and says they deliver they deliver right away with no pain. The doctor's talking to like a trainee doctor, telling her, oh, like, look, like black women, like, they do it so easily. It's not because they don't feel pain, it's because they're so good at masking it and dealing with it, and they're so strong and resilient, basically. So this is the part that really illustrates it. um I moaned something awful. The pains wasn't as bad as I let on, but I had to let them people know having a baby was more than a bowel movement. I hurt just like them women. Just 'cause I wasn't hooping and hollering before didn't mean I wasn't feeling pain. What they think, that just 'cause I knowed how to have a baby with no fuss, that my behind wasn't pulling and aching like theirs. Besides, that doctor don't know what he's talking about. He must never seed no mare full who say they don't have no pain just 'cause she don't cry, 'cause she can't say it, they think it ain't there. If they looks in her eyes and see them eyeballs lolling back, see the sorrowful look, they'd know. So that's perfect illustration of that. And I think it'd be like a shame to talk about feminism and talk about like racism if we're not talking about like how it got there, like the influences. Like when we're talking about Pecola, we need to examine her father and how mentally like okay he was, and his story and her mother's story and everything. I kind of talked about her mother's story, but I'm going to talk about her father's story right now. And it was just like the view that he had on marriage and monogamy, and it was just awful basically. Yeah, like he misplaces his affection like towards his daughter. Like a lot of it, trigger warning, is very sickening. But yeah, so when he was young, he lived in a small town. Like both his parents, talking about Picolo's father, which they called Charlie Breedlove. But when he was young, his parents kind of abandoned him, and he really internalizes that no parental figure, and he doesn't think he's worth it, and that kind of lets him to abandon his morals, um, which is like he kind of romanticizes, even though it's awful, and the girl that there's like this one incident where he was with this girl like in his teenage years called Darlene, and he got caught with her um with some white men. Like they just like um intruded upon them, and he, instead of hating the white men, like hated the girl, and like he kind of became a misogynist, which is very interesting of an idea, honestly, like hating the black teenage girl before um you can consider hating the white men. Like I feel like that's um I don't know, something something to consider in society. I feel like that always happens, you know, misplacing hate, and that's treated as something that's normal, but it shouldn't be. Anyways, that really, like, I don't know, it made him different, and his motivations for marrying um Nicola's mother, Pauline, maybe it was a way for him to feel like he's normal again after he let go his morals, because he felt like he's not worthy because he internalized his parents' abandonment of him. And maybe it was a way to kind of relinquish his hatred of Darlene because he blamed it on her gender. He really saw that he was attracted to the fact that Pauline cared about life while he didn't. I think he wanted to see where that would lead him and how he can unravel that, because he did say like he wanted something about him wanting to know like where that came from. He also had this really twisted idea that just because he knows someone intimately, he can do whatever he wants to them, which is crazy. And I think it's something that he definitely practices with Pauline later in their marriage. Um, because they just get into fights and their fights are so calculated and they're both getting something out of it. They're both using violence and feeling good about it. Like Pauline is trying to feel self-righteous and trying to feel religious and kind of painting Charlie as a demon, and he is letting all of this that I just explained as well. There's the concept of like fragile masculinity, and he is kind of like gets taken from him and gets brought back to him and taken and brought back, and it's so like inconsistent is the word. Like with the incident in his teenage years for Charlie, like with Darlene, I think they call it manhood. It's kind of gross, but anyways, it's or masculinity. I'll just call it masculinity. It's taken away from him in that moment, and then again when he ends up homeless, like in another city after he's taken the train, and he's taken in by some like women that like live in those whereabouts. His manhood is or his masculinity is given back to him. So it's like it's almost meaningless in the way that it's so affected by circumstance. So not only Charlie, but we also examined some other people like Soaphead who have quite similar stories and lots of trigger warnings for like that those parts of this book. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about Charlie because it's kind of integral to talk about him if we're talking about Piccola and the way she thinks and views herself. But yeah, that's about it that I have to talk about. Thank you guys for listening.